Good evening. I'd like to call to order this regular town council meeting for Tuesday, October 24th, 2017. The opening prayer will be given by Pastor Will Marotti of the New Life Church. Please rise.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we thank you for the precious gift of life today. We're mindful as it's raining to continue to pray for those who are recovering from hurricane-stricken areas, and we pray that relief and rebuilding would come quickly. We thank you for the blessing of living in a wonderful town like Wallingford, Connecticut. We pray for our leaders. We ask that you give them wisdom, big decisions, tough challenges financially coming ahead. Help them make the right decisions. Bless their families as they sacrifice time away from them. With a big election coming, we pray that the right men and right women would be chosen to lead us with wisdom and grace. And so we pray tonight for this meeting, and we pray that you would superintend thoughts and conversations, guide them, help them to come to agreement for the betterment of the citizens of Wallingford. We thank you, and we pray all these things in your matchless and wonderful name. Amen.
We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Fishbein.
Here.
Laffin.
Here.
Letourneau.
Here.
Marone. Shurtell.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Testa.
Here.
Zandri. Chairman Cervoni.
Here, Councilor Marone is away on business, and Councilor Zandri has advised me that he is en route from his employment. On to item 3, the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve and accept consent agenda items A through J.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda passes. Item 4, there are no items removed from the consent agenda. On to item 5, the public question and answer period. Good evening, sir. Your name and address for the record, please.
Wayne Gilbert, 44 South Cherry Street. I come before the council tonight to speak against the council voting on the new change for the pension. The documents that the town has provided over the years shows that you can't afford it, and it'll bankrupt the town. If not within 10, 15, 20 years, it certainly will within the first 30. It's a cash balance plan. That cash balance plan is going to be mixed in with the defined benefit plan. Your annual required contribution has been met every year at 100% according to your actuary since 2004. In 2004, the current defined benefit plan had 99.2% funding. Today, even though the towns funded the DB plan at 100% of the ARC, you're down to less than 74% funded. And that's going to continue, and it's going to get worse with cash balance, because cash balance means the new hires that come in will be in a cash balance plan, and they can take their amounts out. One of the other documents that was presented was calculations that were done. They were verified by your personnel department, and they show that an average employee coming in earning $75,000 a year at the end of 30 years is going to have over $900,000 in their account. If just 10 of those new hires take the cash balance when they're entitled to take it, that'll be $9 million. all at once coming out of the fund. Your current fund cannot sustain that. The other thing in your current pension report is your assumptions that are being used. Back in 2004, even though it was 99.2% funded, it was an assumption that you would earn 8% interest. Today, that's dropped to 7.5% assumption, and they've changed the age scales to make it longer for people to live, but you're down below 74%. The current plan, again, according to the same actuary report, is only earning 61.3% in the last 10 years. That factors in the losses that you had. That's 6.1% in terms of over the 10 years of averaging, and yet your assumptions are at 7.5, and you're funded at less than 74%. So the reality is, if you start using the real interest rate that the town's been using, you're funded way below that 73.8 or 9%. So I've got the documents if any counselor would like to have copies of them. I urge that you vote no on this new cash balance pension plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just think it should be on the record that the speaker is a staff representative for the bargaining unit. Well, have you been representing them, whether you're retired or not? Have you been representing them at the
Consulting
meetings?
work for the union, but I have this data because I was at the bargaining table and I'm against this plan. It was bargained in spite of my advice to various people. This is not a good plan for Wallingford, and I'm here as a taxpayer.
Thank you. I think you indicated that you're retired now. Is that I don't think the microphone picked that up.
That's correct. I retired in February. I do consulting work for the union, and yes, I did help to negotiate, but we're not done. We're still in binding arbitration for another bargaining unit that came in at the same time. This cash balance is not good for this town. If you do the numbers from your own documents, you'll see that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I just think the record should be clear that Mr. Gilbert, whether consultant or employed, is representing the bargaining unit.
Thank you. Mr. Chappell, I see you in the wings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the council. I just wanted to speak, first of all, Jonathan Chappell, 9 East Dayton Hill Road.
Thank you.
I was a member of the Charter Revision Commission, and I just wanted to provide the council with some clarity, as well as the voters. There was a question at the last meeting raised by the public about the ability of a town to remove an elected official. And there is no such municipal power. I believe that was the discussion. I can assure you that I've researched the issue myself professionally and as a member of the commission, and the Supreme Court held in 1985 there is no such provision and struck a charter provision that did allow, purported to allow, the recall of an elected official. There was a case mentioned in 2015. It had to do with the city of Hartford and the issues with the registrars. City of Hartford, apparently at that time at least, elected registrars. The court ultimately also ruled there was no such municipal impeachment power. I just want to clarify that for the record. I know that we're coming up on a ballot vote at some point, so I didn't want that misinformation out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gross?
Bob Gross, Long Hill Road. But you do have the power to remove appointed positions, and what the charter is doing is, in my opinion, and you can see it in the charter, the revisions, is there are some standards that you have in there that you can follow to remove people from the charter. I'm not going to go through them all. They're here, they're on, it's section 9 of chapter 2, and it's the last, how you can suspend a person, how many days it takes you to make the removal process. So it gives you some guidelines on how you're to do the process. They're removing it all and asking it to go to an ordinance, which you don't have an ordinance in place at this time. So there's nothing replacing it at this time. And also, most towns, if you look at their charter, do have criteria in the charter for removal of appointed positions that you're removing. And in 2009, that they did make some changes to this one that are in the beginning the same, but in the end they did keep this part of it that this one's removing and added items to it that were listing on how the system was supposed to go. So not leaving it up to the council to decide, but leaving it up to the people to have it all laid out in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chappell?
Jonathan Chapel, still East Dayton Hill Road. I just want to clarify and note that an ordinance requires a public hearing. And when you come to provide the criteria or proposed criteria, to make a safe bet that the public will be here to guide you in that process. Thank you.
Mr. Gross?
Bob Gross, Long Hill Road. Same statement as the last meeting on public hearings. There were public hearings on this last charter. One of them, many people spoke on making the PUC from 3 to 5 members. The council, majority of the council asked the Charter Revision Commission to make the majority 5 versus 3. But it's ultimately going to be who's ever presiding in the public hearing, which would be the town council's decision. This leaves it that the public knows everything that's in there. You can change that. An ordinance can be changed very easily. You can have an ordinance committee meeting, have a public hearing, and change it. Charter, you can't change that easily. And that's the point of having a charter and having some list of things drawn up on how procedures are supposed to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? I will close the public question and answer period. On to item 6, discussion and possible action regarding tentative pension contract agreement, UPSEU 42417 from the Personnel Department.
Good evening, Councilors. Jim Hutt, Town Personnel Director.
Good evening, Dennis Ciccarello, Labor Attorney.
What do you have for us, gentlemen?
We're here tonight to seek your approval on a pension contract for UPSU Local 42417, the town managers and supervisors. The contract to run until August 31st of 2022. There's a new pension plan being introduced for new hires upon ratification. That new pension plan is known as a cash balance plan. The cash balance plan is known as a hybrid plan. It's a defined contribution plan that has the same features as a DB plan in many respects. So I could provide you some of the details. The employee would contribute 7% of their salary into the defined benefit plan. The employer's contribution would be 5%. The interest credit, which would be the rate of return that the town's pension plan would earn on an annual basis, they would earn a return of 0, would be the floor, and no more than 10.8%. There's 3 optional forms of retirement benefit. One would be a single life annuity. Another would be a joint and survivor annuity with a 60% joint and survivor benefit for a surviving spouse only, and a lump sum payment of 100%. And a death and disability benefit that is similar to what current employees have in the DB plan, but with a much lower percentage amount. It would be 25%, and then 1% for every year, up until a maximum of 50%. And the current changes for current employees, there would be no changes for current employees, with the exception of if an employee was to purchase military time, they would pay 7% contribution as opposed to 5%, what's in the current plan. So those are the highlights of the cash balance plan, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Counselor Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, gentlemen. I just had some maybe picayune questions. And I'm looking at Appendix A, I believe it is, for the new employees. Paragraph 1.12 dovetails into the paragraph on page 8. 1.12 says that the participant contribution is treated as pre-tax, but the paragraph on page 8 says it is pre-tax. Is there a difference?
I don't believe there is.
Okay, so that was, okay. And then moving on to 2.2 parent A, it talks about an annual pay credit, the 5% by the employer. When is that payment made into the employee's cash balance account? Is that on an annual basis or is it weekly?
It would be done on a weekly basis, but then annualized at the end of the year, just like it is right now. The employer, we're paying 21.3% of payroll each week, so that 5% would be contributed by the town into the employee's cash balance account. And
Okay.
7% by the employee.
So that would catch the overtime and that kind of stuff because the pay is variable. The percentage is constant, but the pay is variable.
Correct. These are managers, though, they don't earn overtime.
That's true. I think that was all, hold on. The 60%, I'm looking at 2.7, the disability, parent C. Upon the death of a participant receiving the service-connected benefit or non-service-connected benefit, surviving spouse receives 60%. So why wouldn't the surviving spouse, if the employee is vested, and essentially it's their money in their cash account, and they pass, why wouldn't the spouse be entitled to 60%? Why wouldn't they be entitled to 100%, is my question.
The parties agreed to 60%. That's what current employees enjoy. They have a 60% spousal death benefit as well as for disability. So rather than treat them as two separate plans, we agreed to provide a 60% death or disability benefit in the event the participant passed away. So, I suppose you could have 100%, but then you'd have to look at actuarial factors which would have an impact on that. So, for instance, we do have one option for current employees in the DB plan. It's what's known as a 100% joint and survivor benefit. And what happens is the pension is computed, and then based upon the age of the participant and the age of the surviving spouse, there's a factor that's applied to that pension amount, and then the pension is actuarially reduced to provide that same benefit to the spouse upon the death of the retiree.
Okay. And then paragraph 6.1 on page 9. I was going through this a few times and I was just, can you just explain how this, so the picked up is the participant contribution, the deduction of the 7% from the pre-tax earnings of the employee. That's essentially what sentence number 1 and 2 say. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So then it says participant contributions picked up by the employer, okay, so those are those same contributions, shall be paid from the employer's general fund. Conceptually, logistically, what does that mean? How does that work?
Well, I mean, to me, what this means is that we would set aside my budget. I would set aside money every year like I do now for the pension. I would set aside money, 7% of salary for those employees in the cash balance plan, and that money would be deducted from my budget line item and would be put into the pension plan.
Okay, that's one way to interpret it, if that's what that means. And then a deduction shall be made from each participant's compensation equal to 7%, provided that such deduction shall not reduce the participant's compensation for the purposes of computing benefits under this plan. What does that sentence mean?
Well, and, these are actuarial, questions that I could find out something more specific, but to me, what that means is that when let's say someone retires with a disability pension, their wages that are used to compute their final average salary, it's based on their total wages that they paid pension contributions on. So you wouldn't reduce their contribution, you wouldn't reduce their wages by 7% and then compute their benefit. You would use the total benefit that was used, it would be their total wages as opposed to their net wages minus any pension contributions. But I can clarify that with,
Yeah, I'm not going to hold
pension attorney.
this up
No,
for
no.
that, but I would
yeah, I can
appreciate.
clarify that with the pension attorney.
Yeah, please. Okay, thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agreement of the Consolidated Pension Plan for UPSEU Local 424-17, Management and Supervisory Employees of the Town of Wallingford.
Second.
Moved and seconded with a motion on the table. Any further discussion from the council? Anything from the public? Mr. Gilbert, your comments are duly noted. There is no further discussion. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Fishbein?
Yes.
Lappin?
Yes.
Letourneau?
Yes.
Shortell?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Testa?
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
gentlemen. On to item 7.
I move we approve the intermunicipal sanitary sewer use and maintenance agreement for 5 Midland Drive in Wallingford.
Is there a second on the motion? Second. Thank you, Mr. Shortell. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome, and please remind us who you are for the record.
Richard Hendershot, Richard Hendershot, Director of Public Utilities. Neil Amwake, General Manager for the Water and Sewer Divisions.
Mr. Hendershot, I'm glad you're getting used to your new position.
It's a slow but steady process.
Sure. For the benefit of those who do not have all this text in front of them and might be watching in TV land, could you please give us a little explanation of what we're considering tonight?
I will ask the subject matter expert to my right to fill in both those present and those watching at home.
Thank you.
So in late 2005, the town of Wallingford, the city of Meriden, and the homeowner at 4 Midland Drive entered into a 3-party interlocal agreement where the residential dwelling at 4 Midland Drive would be served by gravity sanitary sewer that would connect to the Meriden wastewater collection system. The resident at 5 Midland Drive has now asked to tie into that essentially private sanitary sewer. And in doing so, we need to have a 4-party interlocal agreement between the town of Wallingford, the city of Meriden, number 4 Midland Drive, and number 5 Midland Drive. The private sanitary sewer would be owned and operated by both number 4 and number 5 Midland Drive, who would be responsible for all costs associated with operating, maintenance, and repair of that private sanitary sewer system that would then drain to the city of Meriden. It is applicable to both the current owners as well as their heirs. So this agreement has been approved by the Public Utilities Councils, and it is in front of the Town Council for approval so that the mayor can then execute the agreement on behalf of the town of Wallingford.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Councilor Letourneau.
Currently, where is their sewage going? Is it going to Meriden?
It drains by gravity into the city of Meriden, correct. These are the first 2 properties in Wallingford on the Meriden town line.
Okay, so what we would be doing tonight is just making it an official that they could actually do this, or how were they able to do that, from the beginning?
Well, in 2005, we went through the same process for number 4 Midland. Number 5 Midland is in front of us tonight for approval. Currently, number 5 has a failing septic system.
Okay.
So the 2 options for 5 are to replace their septic and leach field, or tie into the sanitary sewer, and you do the cost-benefit analysis. There's quite a difference.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. What if they were on sewer or septic, and that straightened that out. What about their water? Are they on well water?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I have the same thing. I'm on city sewer and I have well water, so yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Testa.
Thank you. Good evening. You're presenting this to us, so may I assume that this is something you're all in favor of?
That is correct. We have looked at the engineering plans, and the agreement has been reviewed by both the City of Meriden as well as the Town of Wallingford Legal Counsel.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the resident here in the chamber?
They are not.
They are not. Okay.
Earlier, we understood there might have been a conflict, or maybe a similar meeting going on right now in Meriden that they're attending. I don't know that that's the case, but we thought it was the case at one point.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Anything else from the council? Questions or comments from the public? There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein.
Yes.
Laffin.
Yes.
Letourneau.
Yes.
Shortell.
Yes.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Testa.
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
On to item 8, which is discussion and possible action regarding Public Act 17-155, temporary healthcare structures. We have representatives from Planning and Zoning coming forward. Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening. What you have in front of you is,
Wait a minute. Who are you?
I am Casey Hand, town planner.
I'm Jim Seichter, Chairman of the Chairperson of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you. And Mrs. Hand, please.
Thank you. So what was provided for you in your packets was some information regarding Public Act 17-155, which was passed as part of the 2017 legislative session. It actually became effective October 1st of this year. And it was an act concerning temporary health care structures. The act itself, the legislation itself, requires municipalities to allow what are deemed temporary health care structures. They're defined as a transportable residential structure that provides an environment in which a caregiver may provide for a mentally or physically impaired person, and it's subject to certain restrictions and requirements. The legislation does also allow a municipality the option to opt out of the provision. So if you don't opt out, you're in. It's allowed as permitted in the legislation. If the municipality would like to opt out, it's a two-step process. The first is that a public hearing has to be held by the Planning and Zoning Commission, properly noticed. And if they vote to opt out, it then goes to the legislative body for a vote. Both agencies have to agree or have to actively vote to opt out in order for that to happen. The Planning and Zoning Commission at their October meeting did vote to opt out of the legislation as written. As part of that, one of the things that we did decide to do is to revisit our accessory apartment regulations just to see if there was anything that we should modify or tweak to make sure that we're addressing the intent of this legislation. This legislation, I absolutely understand and support the intent of this legislation. The issue is that I think it's somewhat, I have some concerns, and we had some concerns about the language and the specifics of the legislation. There are some concerns about exactly how it's implemented and administered, and then there are also some concerns about the details of the legislation and how they apply to Wallingford, how they apply to single-family residential zones, and whether or not they're practical and fitting for Wallingford. Specifically, I gave you an outline of some of our concerns, and this has been there's been a lot of buzz about this in the planning community since it was passed, and I think I also provided you with some information about some of the towns that have opted out or stayed in. A lot of the ones that have opted out have done something similar to what we did, which is say, we have accessory apartment regulations or something along those lines. Let's look at them, let's make sure they're doing what we want them to do and they're meeting this need. But a lot of planners and a lot of communities have had the same concerns that we have. So specifically, and I'll try to summarize them briefly, the concerns that I think are presented by the legislation, again, the intent is to allow that someone that's in need of additional care because of a physical or mental impairment has the ability to live on the premise with their caregiver. One of the requirements of the legislation is that they provide certification to us that they meet the definition of the physical or mental impairment. That presents a lot of concerns from our perspective in terms of privacy laws versus freedom of information laws. So if my office is collecting that information, I have someone's private doctor information, but it's subject to potentially subject to freedom of information. And also, that's not a zoning matter for me to be, or anyone in my department at least, to be making determinations about someone's mental or physical impairment. The other thing is it would require us to recertify that with them every year. On top of that, we have to ensure that the caregiver is unpaid. One of the concerns about that is that it doesn't allow for one of the intentions of the regulation, which is that somebody could have like in-home hospice care or something along those lines because the person can't be paid. So that means that we have to somehow determine whether or not the person's being paid. There are also some concerns about sort of the actual structures themselves. The municipality can require that they connect to public water and sewer or private well and septic. You had some information that was provided to you from the Water and Sewer Division and the Health Departments about some of the concerns to do with that. And along those lines, we also are supposed to, or we have to, require that the structure be removed once the person is either no longer living there or no longer meets the definition of a physically or mentally impaired person. That's problematic in a lot of different ways. I think we're requiring people to tie into either water and sewer or well and septic, and then requiring them to remove the structure. We can require a $50,000 bond to ensure the removal, but again, I mean, that's a huge added expense for people. So on the one hand, I think that as I said, I think the intention of the legislation is good. I think it's something we've considered, but I also think that we want it to be something that people can actually use and that makes sense for people. And on the other hand, we also want it to be something that makes sense for the town and for the zoning in the town. The planning and zoning, and just a few more things, some of the definitions, transportable is a pretty broad term. Temporary is a pretty broad term. And procedurally, the way it would work is someone would apply for a building permit for one of these, and the town has 15 days to approve the permit. That's a very limited amount of time, especially if there are other issues involved. Wetlands is not addressed. And as part of that process, the applicant is required to notify their abutting neighbor, but there's no process for the neighbor to provide any input if they have any, so it's very misleading. So, as I said, there are some concerns we have about implementation and administration. There are concerns we have about the legislation itself, and as I said, Wallingford already has accessory apartment regulations. The accessory apartment regulations, the major difference is that the accessory apartment regs require the accessory apartment to be attached to the main house. Beyond that, there's not a lot of difference. Our accessory apartments are allowed to be larger. They don't differentiate around who can live there as long as the main unit is owner occupied. So it provides for a reasonable use moving down the line, so to speak. So for these reasons, we feel that, I think the Planning and Zoning Commission has really over the years talked about and considered the needs of the community. We actually increased the size that accessory apartments could be several years ago. But we just don't feel the legislation quite applies to, or is quite appropriate for Wallingford. So the issue is before you to consider acting to opt out of the legislation.
Okay, so as I understand, on October 11th, you did have a public hearing.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, and if I was listening to you correctly, in order for the council to then ratify the P&Z decision, do we also have to have a public hearing?
No, you just have to have a vote. So the public hearing, it's a very odd, administratively it's very odd, but P&Z had to hold the public hearing and properly notice it, which they did, and then the legislation just states that a vote has to be had after that by the legislative body.
Okay. And is there a time period within which we do have to consider after P&Z has had their public hearing?
No, there's not a time frame specified.
Okay. And I guess my concern is there a time period that if after a certain amount of time passes, if the council doesn't take action, do we lose the opportunity?
No, I don't believe so. The timing-wise, the thing to keep in mind is that it became effective October 1st. The municipalities didn't get a lot of time to go through this process. So technically it's effective right now. Now, we don't have the administrative procedures in place, so if someone came in, we would have to figure out how to do that. So it's effective unless and until the council decides to vote otherwise. But no, I don't think there's any maximum time period.
Thank you. Mr. Seichter, did you have anything to add?
I think Mrs. Hand, I think she gave a very good overview as far as what the, what the act, the intention of the act. And I think it's, a well-intentioned act, but it has a lot of unintended consequences that, frankly, when the Planning and Zoning Commission was considering this, based on those unintended consequences, I just don't think that we would want to have those come about. And again, as Mrs. Hand indicated, we do have accessory apartments or accessory apartments in our regulations that provide for something very similar to this. And again, as mentioned, these are 500 square feet, and our accessory apartments are 750, 790. So you certainly can have a larger apartment. And the other thing here is, again, there is the need for removal, and while someone has to post or we could require a $50,000 bond to be posted, I suspect that the town will never go on someone's private property, pull the bond and take the structure off. So while that, again, is well-intentioned, I just don't see that ever happening.
And even if you do, you've got public utilities to
exactly.
terminate.
Yeah, you have a lot. You have numerous issues to deal with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Questions from the council. Councilor Chartel.
Hi, Jim. Casey Hand. It's odd. Trying to get used to it. Two very quick questions. What was the vote at P&Z? Was it unanimous?
It was a unanimous vote. There were only, I will say, there were only 4 commission members there. We have a 5-member commission, so the 4 commission members who were there who voted, it was a unanimous vote.
Okay. And my only other question is around the other towns, and you did provide that. I'm looking at that list right now, and I mean, obviously the reasons you just stated are very compelling. All of them, I won't restate them, but I'm just curious. There are a small number of towns who are not opting out: Torrington, Southington, Canton. I'm just curious if you have any insight. Why have they figured out a way to navigate these issues, or what would their reasons be for not opting out?
As I said, there was a lot of sort of buzz in the planning community and on the planners listserv where we all talk about these things. And at least in terms of Canton, Torrington, and one of the other municipalities, the conversation was that they didn't think they thought there wouldn't be any applications to do it anyhow, so they didn't think it was worth pursuing opting out. That I will say, in one of the other municipalities, or in a couple of the other municipalities that are opting out, the position was more that they felt that was something that they wanted to encourage. They wanted to provide additional housing options in the town, and they didn't want to appear to create stumbling blocks for people. One thing I should say is a lot of the concern that this legislation came out of was a lot of towns require special permits for their accessory apartments. We don't. It's by site plan here, so it doesn't necessitate much of the time and money that is typically involved with a special permit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the accessory apartment that we have, but I look at this as this is a separate structure that could be wheeled in, some kind of a trailer of some sort. And so all the utilities for that, would it come from the house to the trailer, or would it have to be a separate hookup, separate electricity from the pole to the temporary structure? And the same thing with the water and sewer. Would that have to happen?
That's up to each municipality to decide. That's at your discretion whether or not they would have a separate system or they would connect to the primary units system. I believe there was something from the Water and Sewer Division that we provided to you, and I believe the general position there was that they would have to provide a separate system. So either way, it has to disconnect somehow, but obviously, right, installing a whole separate system is more of a challenge and more costly than building off of the existing system.
Okay. When you had your public hearing on this, did anybody come from the audience to say this is,
We had members,
use this?
there was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Casey, we had one gentleman from the public who spoke, and he spoke in favor of opting out.
Of opting out?
Yes, that's correct.
I agree. Conceptually, it's a great thing, but when you get into, the devil's in the detail. And when you get into the detail, that's where I see the wheels coming off on this. I could see, I wouldn't be opposed to opting out of this, but in doing so, I would like to see planning and zoning maybe craft something from this that we could use, where somebody could take, maybe they don't have the ability to put an accessory apartment, where something like this, they have a situation where they need something like this. And, maybe we could, or when I say we, the town, the planning and zoning could craft, it might be a couple of workshops, but I know you guys love workshops, could come up with something. And, that would have fit us. So, by opting out, we're just not shelving the whole project, say, that's it, I don't want to hear any more about it, but come back and see if we can kind of build it for us.
Well, I think that's some of the position that some of the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission took during our meeting when we discussed this. There was discussion about looking at our accessory apartment regulations, and looking at those to see perhaps if we can modify them in some way. Also, one thing to keep in mind when we talk about accessory apartments, in some cases, it's not necessarily building onto the house. We've approved numerous accessory apartments where they may have been in the basement, as long as you have access to ground level access to the to the outside. So it's not necessary. You're fitting out, certainly would have to fit out the basement part of your home, but that's certainly a lot less costly than adding on, and probably than any one of these temporary structures. It's not to say that everyone who would like an accessory apartment has the ability to, say, fit out a basement. So there are, again, some options that are available. But again, not to be redundant and long-winded, but yeah, it's our intention to take a harder look at our accessory apartment regulations.
Yeah, I could see in situations where maybe there's not enough room to do it in the basement, or the basement you just can't do it, that maybe a structure that they're talking about here could be brought close to the house, connected to the house somehow, because it's all on a temporary basis. This isn't, but again, I know temporary is...
Temporary could mean a lifetime.
It could be a lifetime, and it depends whose lifetime. So,
exactly.
It could be a child where you could conceivably have 50 years, or it could be 5 years. So, but I still think it's something that we really should look at and craft something that's good for Wallingford. So
We have our first workshop, Mr. Letourneau. You'll be on our list for notification.
Good. I'd love to work on this. Thank you.
Councilor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that exchange was a perfect example of the things that should go on. Local control, instead of the state telling us what we should do. So when this language originally came out, there was no opt-out. And Section J was added, and the matter was put on consent. And I did vote in favor of this in Hartford because there is the opt-out, because I want you guys to decide. So I have a level of trust here, and I'm supportive of what's before us tonight. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Councilor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also recognize the name change and say congratulations to you. Jim, thank you for being here. Very good presentation. I want to thank the Corporate Council for providing some clear language on why we would be opting out. Where are we on the timetable for rendering a decision?
You are in a position where it's basically the ball's in your court. You could render a decision tonight or whenever you feel you're ready to do so.
Okay. And you have already successfully completed 2 of the 3 steps? Okay, good. Do we have any accessory apartments right now in town?
Hundreds.
We do? Oh, okay, we do.
We generally, not to overstate it, but almost once a month or at our monthly meeting, we'll approve 1 and sometimes 2 accessory apartments.
Okay, and there's probably some that we never approved and they're out there anyway, right?
And then we're hoping, we have some of those coming forward too that
Yeah.
we approve. Because there's some people, again, they may purchase a home and may not be aware of it, and then they're looking to, have it, essentially have it legalized.
Sure, sure. Okay, well, it looks like we have a very feasible option for people in this position. And again, I appreciate everything you've done here. Again, the documentation is terrific. Corporate counsel did her homework. So I'm very much in favor of approving this. And to Councilor Fishbine's point, it is nice, for once, to have an option from the state as a municipality to opt out. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you mentioned earlier that you had increased the size of regulated accessory apartments. Am I correct to recall that was somewhat in response to the number of variance requests you got to make accessory apartments larger than the regulations allowed?
Oh, I think that would be fair to say to some degree.
I mean, you didn't get the variance requests because that doesn't go before your board, but
That's correct.
but there seemed to be a trend, as I recall.
That was before my time, so I'm not
Yeah,
positive.
I think that general comment is probably fair.
Councilor Laffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Casey, formerly Costello, and thank you for all the work that you've put into this, and Mr. Seichter, again, thank you for your time and work with the planning and zoning. I think it speaks a lot that there was a unanimous decision. We have a very strong working group that really comprises of the Planning and Zoning Commission, very bipartisan, very get the job done. And I think that speaks a lot to looking at this issue and the results that came out of it. That being said, I'd like to move that we opt out of PA 17-155 temporary health care structures.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion now that there's a motion on the table from the council. Anyone else? Then I'll go to the public. Anyone from the public care to be heard? There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Okay. Fishbein?
Yes.
Laffin?
Yes.
Letourneau?
Yes.
Shortell?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Testa?
Yes.
Sandri?
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, I am going to jump ahead on the agenda to the addendum that was posted yesterday. This is item 18.
Mr. Chairman, as I think and I hope everybody knows in town, and I think it would be hard not to be aware, that this is Red Ribbon Week. And 5 years ago, born of tragedy to bring an end to future tragedy, the Coalition for a Better Wallingford got together and decided to do something about the pain that they had experienced themselves and also had witnessed being experienced around them. With that, and tying into what I'm sure everyone is aware of through the media, whether it be the Record Journal or Facebook, the Congress somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for, with unintended consequences possibly, passed a bill, what's been referred to as the Marino Bill. And what it has ended up resulting in is in tying the hands of the DEA in working against trafficking of opiates into the United States. And the coalition, this being a mission of theirs, has brought forth a resolution to us that I would like to put forth before the council and move that we resolve that whereas this week, the last week in October, is Red Ribbon Week in Wallingford, a week dedicated to eliminating the concerns surrounding addiction and its impact upon youth, families, and survivors of those lost to addiction. Whereas it has been brought to light through the recent media attention that in March of 2016, the United States Congress passed the Moreno Bill, taking authority away from the Drug Enforcement Administration and its ability to enforce the Controlled Substances Act. Whereas during the period from 2000 to 2016, the United States has lost more than 188,000 lives as a result of opiate addiction. The crisis continues. Now therefore be it resolved that the Town Council of the Town of Wallingford stands firmly in support of those taking on the opiate crisis, seeking resolutions to combat opiate addiction and related deaths. The Council is furthermore in support of congressional efforts to repeal the Moreno Bill. Any congressional representative planning to attend any of the Red Ribbon Week ceremonies in Wallingford should do so with the intention of explaining his or her plans to repeal the Moreno Bill, thereby restoring the DEA power to enforce the Controlled Substances Act. The Wallingford Town Council further urges Americans to embark upon a letter campaign with the intended result of sending 188,000 letters to their respective congressional representatives.
Moved and seconded. Good evening, Mr. Welch. I decided to take you up here now because I think you could make the 8 o'clock seating of your fundraiser an awareness dinner going on across the street. Is that right?
That's right. I appreciate that very much.
Sure. Is there anything you want to add to what Councilor Laffin said?
It goes without saying how serious a matter this is and how egregious the act appears to most Americans. Those of us that are faced with the results of this, not that we all are, but those of us that are in the front line, so to speak, volunteers that have put thousands of hours into trying to arrest the problem, and wondering every day, how does it get worse? This is about the worst betrayal. I can't tell you how angry most of the people in the coalition that are working every day to try to make a difference feel about this. It's just the most unbelievable enlightenment of what's going on when we don't watch what's going on with legislation. It's just I don't know. It's beyond words. I'm obviously emotional about it. I can't put it into words in the right way right now. But I've never been more angry in my life. And I'm speaking for everybody in our town, hopefully everybody in the nation, and I hope they follow suit with this. So I appreciate the resolution and the support.
Thank you. You've been before us before, and if I haven't said it before, or if I have, I'll say it again. I want to thank you for your passion and your hard work and dedication to this issue.
Thanks.
Certainly.
I have letter packets for everybody in the room if they want to join in the letter writing campaign. I've added one for each of you, and I'll leave them here.
We found them on our desk along with the sugar cookies, the Red Ribbon sugar cookies. Thank you very much. Councilor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I share the concern, and I have no answers. I think I've shared previously that over the past 3 years, I've lost upwards of 10 clients, former clients, to drug addiction who passed away. Within the past week, another one. So I certainly share and very concerned. But I'm also concerned that the day before our council meeting, we get a proposed resolution that I spent about 6 hours yesterday researching. And I'm concerned that the good intentions are more surrounded by politics than having a good result. The Marino bill, which was House Resolution 471, as far as I can tell, never passed. It is instead the bill that was presented by Orrin Hatch in the Senate, which was 483. It appears that some people have, 553 days after this thing passed, put a target on Tom Marino merely because he was being put up by President Trump for a position. And I really don't want to get swept into that. It appears that the application of the language is part of the problem. The resolution that's before us, there's certainly portions of it that I wholeheartedly support. The first paragraph, recognizing Red Ribbon Week, dedicating to surrounding addiction and families and survivors. I certainly embrace that. But then when we go and attack the Marino bill, which, as I said before, it appears never passed, I don't know how we can ask anybody or to support a repeal of something that apparently doesn't exist. The third paragraph, recognizing 188,000 deaths as a result of opiate addiction. I support that representation. I think it's non-political, it's neutral. And the first sentence of the second section, where it says the Wallingford Town Council stands firmly in support of those taking on the opioid crisis, seeking resolutions to combat opioid addiction and related deaths. I embrace that. The rest of this, given where we are now, given what I've looked at, I talked to Janice yesterday, she sent me some stuff, I read and read and read last night into the night. I just don't want to get wrapped up in something that's not appropriate. So, Mr. Welch, I certainly embrace the intention, but I can't support the resolution as it presently exists. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Councilor Sullivan.
I thought we were going to leave politics out of this. Obviously not. I just wanted to apologize to you because last night I had another commitment. I could not make the opening ceremony of Red Ribbon Week. I'm usually there.
Yes.
I do apologize. It is important to me. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get out of a commitment. As far as the resolution, I support it 100%. I had a brother who died of alcoholism about 4 years ago, and we couldn't help him. Nobody could help him from himself, unfortunately, and I lost him. Didn't get to know him very well because he was always isolated because of his problem. And anytime we reached out, as many times as we got him hospitalized, he just went right back to doing what he was doing. I understand what you're trying to do, and I understand what it's like to lose someone to addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol. But I can tell you, as long as I'm sitting up here, and I damn well hope I'm here after November 7th, I'm going to support the coalition because this is a problem and we need to deal with it. So you have my full support. And I want to thank Councilor Laffin for reading that resolution. And I hope everyone in this town understands how important this is. And they attend at least one of these events this week or read about it on Facebook. Watch the video on Facebook of the opening ceremony. It's that important. So thank you for what you're doing, to you and Jen and all the volunteers. It's critical that we continue to fight this fight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Mayor, did you want to say something?
Yes, just in terms of some of the detail, I think much of this is based upon the Washington Post and the 60 Minutes investigative report, which was aired last Sunday, and certainly that can be viewed by most people if you turn to the correct channel on the television or the on-demand services or whatever. But, and Washington can be, as any legislative process can be, difficult to follow individual names through a process. But that investigative piece was pretty clear about the main movers as far as what went through the House. It was approved by the House. It then went to the Senate. A slightly different version was approved by the Senate, and then the two ended up approving a final version, all by consent. The president signed also without much fanfare, and it's law. What does not go, to my knowledge, which is what has not been controverted, has not been explained, to my knowledge, is two objections under what was passed by the United States Congress and signed into law. One is a refined definition of imminent danger, and the DEA was tasked with enforcing the Controlled Substances Act and certainly utilized that phrase where they saw there was imminent danger. They would act immediately and look to curtail the flow of pills, drugs to a given location. So there was a new definition advanced. Secondly, the bill requires that basically, in my words, a negotiation occur between the distributor or the company prior to any order being effected. So you notify the defendant that we've got a problem with what you're doing. They had 30 days to bring in a plan to eliminate the problems that were being identified by DEA, and obviously this strings out a process over a period of time. Clearly, if someone has been ordered to stop doing something, immediately negotiation stops. Without this legislation, I mean, that would always be the case. You know, what are we doing wrong, et cetera. But this formalizes something that, in the words of the lead investigator for DEA, basically severely curtailed their ability to do the job they were assigned to do. And in the course of it, he ultimately lost his job because he was represented as threatening Congress. None of this has been countered with another explanation. That is, to me, very troubling. Is there no other explanation then? I haven't seen anything from any of the legislative offices. No office anywhere has said, no, this investigation was way off base. So, you know, we are confronted with agencies, with people who are assigned duties who either are not able to do their duty or others are not living up to our trust in them to see that we are being protected. And that includes the lawsuits against some physicians, that includes some lawsuits against some caregivers, which were under completely different earlier actions. Some high-level administrators of drug companies themselves have been arrested in the course of things. I think that was back in 2007. It's just disturbing to see that we have to worry about inside our efforts to combat such an insidious issue as addiction. Inside of that is also an area of battle over what values will prevail, who is protecting us and who isn't. So this is more than a legitimate effort by the town council, the town in general, and most important, the volunteers who are part of Coalition for a Better Wallingford. You know, this is part of a battle to make it a better state, a better country, and we have to be watchful. This is part of that watchfulness.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very difficult subject for me. Ken, thank you very much for all the work you've done, and Jen has done, and the whole coalition. I believe this resolution tonight, we can split hairs over the legalities of it, but it's a help. Anything that we can do to help this opioid addiction, we need to do. And I say that sitting here because I have a vested interest in this. I lost a child to an opioid addiction. My daughter died of oxycodone, an overdose of oxycodone. And it's one thing losing a child, and when she passed, my 5-year-old grandson was at her side. He's now 18 years old, and he remembers watching his mother die. And when somebody dies from an overdose of oxycodone, you bleed out of every orifice in your body. And he watched that. Now, I say that not to look for sympathy, look for pity, but I say this as, ladies and gentlemen, we're at war. This is, don't let anybody kid you, this is a war. And when stuff like this goes on in Washington, we take 2 steps forward and 1 backwards. It's got to stop. It has got to stop. I don't want anybody to go through what my wife and I have gone through. We watched the 60-minute program, and we both sat there in stunned silence. We couldn't believe it. We just absolutely could not believe it. And that hurts. Let me tell you, that hurt watching this. But then there's hope. There's hope when we have an organization in town like the Coalition, when we have an organization in town such as our police department that makes drug bust after drug bust after drug bust constantly. There's hope. And there's hope that parents out there will not get the call that I got the call from the Meriden Police Department on a Sunday morning. Dear Mr. Letourneau, I'm sorry to inform you, your daughter has passed from a drug overdose. That hurts. So I will do everything. I will sign every piece that comes down for me. I will write letters. I will do anything if it saves 1. In my lifetime, if I can save 1, I consider I reached the goal. But we need everybody to do that. We need to stop. We need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to be able to say it any better than it's already been said, but I want to be able to emphasize my support behind it. I mean, you know very well, I've stepped up a number of times for the organization. Whether it needed me to or not, I would call and find out. I would much rather be next door right now having some dinner, because this was my dinner, so thank you for bringing the sugar cookies for all of us. I can't emphasize the importance to people, not only to stand watch and pay attention, but to get involved and do something. We need the help and the boots on the ground. What you and the volunteers do will only be magnified and amplified if we can get more help to you. So that's why you have my full support. One of the first things I did, the paperwork that was up here, I write in my bag. That'll be signed before I go to bed, and it'll be out in the mail. We've all got to take action. It's enough to keep watch. It's enough to say thank you to the police department. It's enough to say thank you to you, but we need people involved. And that's what I'm basically trying to say here. That's my ask to the folks that are here, to the folks that are watching. when it ends up in the paper, wherever it goes. Get involved, because like Councilor Letourneau said, if it only saves one person, that's a victory. And I can't emphasize that any more than's already been said. So thank you for the time, thank you for the effort, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Councilor Testa?
Quick, simple. Ken, you know I back you up 100%. I'm behind everything you're doing. You may not see me at all your events, but you know I'm in the school. And on a daily basis, I'm talking to these kids, and this is always going to be part of my, what I'm looking out for and what I'm talking to. So whatever's happening in the school, I'll do my best to, you know, to fight the cause with you. So thanks for all you're doing.
I know that, thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Fishbein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 2 bills in the course of my research over last night. 2 bills have already been offered. House Resolution 4084 and Senate Bill 1960, both to repeal the Orrin Hatch bill. They both reference Public Law 114-145. So I think we're a little bit off base here. But I think it's important that it references our congressional representatives. Maybe the next time they come to town, somebody should ask them, do you actually read what you're voting on? Because I know I do. And as I said before, 552 days ago this was passed. And I have good wishes, but I just don't think the resolution is appropriate. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. I too did some research, and I had a couple conversations with you, Ken. And I think you will agree with me that the language that you initially proposed to me was a little more vehement and something that I thought was a little more political than I was willing to author. And so I compromised the strength of your statement with respect to our congressional representatives. And thank you for understanding that. So I also did some research, and there is a law review article being written that's that's been released, but it's not finalized. One of the authors is John Mulrooney, who is an administrative law judge for the DEA, I believe. It's a 115-page article with a lot of technical language in it, but there were a few of his opinions and conclusions that struck me, and I think they bear repeating. After one point, he's analyzed the impact on the DEA enforcement ability. His conclusory sentence is, if it had been the intent of Congress to completely eliminate the DEA's ability to ever impose an immediate suspension on distributors or manufacturers, it would be difficult to conceive of a more effective vehicle for achieving that goal. That's a pretty powerful statement about the impact of the act. And then, as you read through it, you'll note that there seems to be impediments to the DEA's ability to stop shipments. And the concern there is that shipments get released, they end up in the wrong hands, and instead of getting to the street or getting to patients with prescriptions, these shipments end up on the black market and end up in the wrong hands and cause all kinds of damage. There seems to be a relaxing of the standard for the distributors and the manufacturers, but there's a greater imposition of regulation on the prescribers, which I thought was very interesting. So once again, in his conclusion near the end of the article, I thought this was a pretty powerful statement. Regarding manufacturers and distributor registrants, but notably not practitioner registrants, Congress has surgically pared back the evidence that may be considered by the agency in Public Interest Factor 5 by narrowly redefining factors as may be relevant to and consistent with the public health and safety and created a definition of immediate danger to the public health and safety in a manner that renders agency utilization of an immediate suspension order against those types of registrants all but impossible to defend in the federal courts. To me, those two quotes are pretty powerful statements about an educated opinion about the impact of the act. With that, we'll go to the public if there's any comment from the public. There being none, I bring it back to the council. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein,
No.
Laffin,
Yes.
Letourneau,
Yes.
Shortell,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Testa,
Yes.
Zandri,
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes.
The resolution passes.
Thank you, Mr. Welch.
Thank you. Could I make just a comment before I leave? And I respect your opinion, Craig, and your position. I don't think this has to do with politics at all. But I am fearful that for those people that are benefiting from the greed of this and taking advantage of our system, basically indicting the entire democratic system with all of, it's at least unethical how this came about. We could banter about the law number and the author, but to take a position in favor, against this resolution, in favor of what's happened and the impact on our communities, I hope no one views your position as being in favor of that, because that's a very dangerous, dangerous thing. We're talking about people dying here. And unless we muster every ounce of everybody against this, it's a runaway train. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the resolution.
I hope you have a successful event across the street. Thank you. On to item 9, which is discussion regarding a new town-wide emergency and departmental radio communication project. And we will welcome the police chief and fire chief.
Good evening, Mr.
Good evening. If you could just all identify yourselves for the record, I'd be grateful.
William Wright, Police Chief.
Mark Mikulski, Deputy Police Chief.
Rich Eigert, Fire Chief.
Joe Setnar, Deputy Fire Chief.
Thank you. What do you have for us, chiefs?
The matter that is before you this evening is a request for a discussion as it relates to a town-wide two-way radio system. Currently in our community we have several standalone disparate two-way radio systems. The police department has one, fire, public works, public utilities. As we sit here this evening, the Board of Education has a very light footprint for a two-way radio system. It's typically line of sight on the school campus itself. There is no manner in which the school can communicate with our communication center via two-way radio. Should the principal or the administrator of a school have to leave the office for a situation on the school campus and not take their cell phone with them, then they typically, as we sit here, cannot communicate with our communication center. The police department's radio system is nearing its 20-year-old life cycle. Back in 2014, this body approved the purchase of portable and mobile radios for the police department. At that time, correspondence that was distributed to the members of the council indicated that we were nearing the end of life cycle for our current two-way radio system. Here we are 4 years later, 3.5, 4 years later, and that has borne itself out to be very true. Chief Heidgard and I started a discussion as related to interoperability between both of our departments, and with Chief Heidgard's thought process, we moved forward and kind of wondered out loud, if you will, what state were the other town departments in as related to the same issue. And what we quickly were able to determine is not only were we collectively in need of radio gear, but so were our partners in this process. This discussion started approximately 18 months ago, very formally and very diligently with the work of Deputy Chief Sentner and Deputy Chief Mikulski, and Chief Heidgard and I driving forward with this proposal, or at least this consideration that's before you this evening. I can tell you that a lot of work has gone into what we've prepared and distributed to you prior to tonight's meeting. I can tell you that there's been a tremendous amount of work done by all of the other town departments involved in this proposal, and we really come before you this evening to answer any questions that you have, to give you any more information that might not be contained in that document that you're in receipt of, and we certainly open ourselves to any questions that you might have.
Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, all. Chief, this is a very good comprehensive report that you put together. The only question I had I'm not going to be able to find it in here, but you included the obviously the police department, the fire department, and also the schools. But I didn't see anything. I think maybe the water department was in on this too.
Yes.
Okay, but I didn't see the electric.
The electric division currently operates at an 800 megahertz system.
Oh, they do.
They're already at high band. For reasons which Mr. Hendershot has explained to us, they wish to remain on a standalone system. Apparently there's a tremendous amount of switching that goes on throughout the day, where his crews out in the field are working on lines, and they need immediate communication, if you will, back to his facilities where some work is going on in order to keep the safety of his staff as paramount, certainly. And he's chosen, Director Hendershot has chosen to leave that system alone.
Okay, but they will be with them on the 800 cycle, and you guys are going to be on the 800. You will be able to have the ability to communicate if needed, or not?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. There is some trunking software that would have to be put into radios in order for that communication to take place. But because the police department in this proposal would be at 800 megahertz where the electric division is now, that can take place very easily.
Good, good. Because I know, I understand Mr. Hendershot's position, but during times of a storm, police and fires on the scene, or police on the scene if something happens, and it's good to be able to have everybody on the ability to talk to each other. And you explained that very well in your document also. So it's good. And I think the biggest thing with this is it's going to, it'll eliminate the RF background interference, but it'll also eliminate the dead zones. And I think just about everybody in Wallingford has at one time or another been to Home Depot or Lowe's or one of the big box stores, gone to the back of the store and lost cell service. So, it's not much different for you guys, and, that's pretty important if there's an emergency in communication. So, and I think the only other question I have on this, questions that came forward from just a couple of people that have asked me, and I said, watch the watch the council meeting and you'll get an answer on this, but, you know, why not go out to bid? Why is it set up like this? Why Motorola? Why not another company? So maybe if you can just give a brief synopsis on that, you know, why Motorola and why not go out to bid, so the folks at home can understand a little better.
Sure. Presently, all of the departments that I mentioned are using Motorola gear. The police department has used Motorola gear exclusively as far back as our records show. They are the premier two-way radio system manufacturer. This system that we're proposing will set a course forward for the community for the next 20 to 50 years. Quite frankly, we're not willing to consider anything less than the premier system for our community. It's something we've enjoyed all along. I think we can all agree that it's not cheap, it's very expensive. We already own Motorola gear, which we're going to keep. The radios that this body approved in 2014 for the police department are going to remain in place. There is inherent software in those radios for encryption for our undercover operations. That is not something that, for the safety of our officers, that we're willing to compromise. There are other manufacturers, but we have a long-standing history with Motorola. The system that we're currently using at the police department is nearing its 20-year life cycle, and just very recently started to hiccup a little bit. It's rock solid. The constellation that's been put in place is rock solid. We have on the 800 megahertz side, on the police side, absolutely no dead spots in town. The national standard is 85% of coverage 85% of the time. We are 100-100. And if we can bring fire, public works, the utilities to some extent, and certainly equally as important, the Board of Education onto one umbrella, and under one umbrella where everyone has at least 95-95 coverage, then that's something that we're very, very interested in. I can offer you that there are state contract pricing for Motorola gear. And we haven't entered into formal negotiations with Motorola, but I can offer you that through our own research and from talking to our current service provider, the deep discounts that we believe are going to come into play make this a worthwhile endeavor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mayor.
Two things. One is, I think it should be understood that the inclusion of the other departments is in part, it's appropriate, there's nothing to do with that. But if it should be too costly for one reason or another, those components, we're not committing now that all of those have to be part of this. So we'll see what the pricing looks like for all of those other components. For instance, the utilities may want to join in on something, they may not, depending upon those factors. The second thing is I'd ask the chief to just say a few words about, should we go to bid, we will have to have someone write specifications and that side of the equation without a bid waiver, what that might entail.
So in order to go to bid, we would have to seek a consultant to write bid specifications for us. We don't have the technical expertise to do that. It's very specific work. Our neighbors to the south and our neighbors to the west are both doing exactly what we're doing right now and have hired a consultant. I can tell you that both are paying well over $50,000 to a consultant to do that work. It'll back this project up probably a year or more than likely 18 months. My concern with that is our current vendor has provided guidance to us and has been a critical partner with us in making sure that this system is exactly what we need. And once a consultant comes into play and generates those specifications, my fear is that once the system is purchased, we would have to live with what's been spec'd. And the only thing we would have to go on at that point would be the written word. And my fear is that a critical component would be left behind, and we would be back before you for certainly additional funding. There are some critical points and components of this system that we have paid very close attention to. One of which primarily is the tower next to the police department, right next to the police department, would need to be replaced along with the tower at Cook Hill Firehouse. Those two towers are lattice frame construction meant for the antenna array that's up there now. This new gear that we're proposing is microwave point-to-point based. Some dish style antennas, some are more linear. And those current two towers aren't rigid enough for both twist and sway to hold this new gear. Being that we're a very close neighbor to those residences just to the north of us, and the fact that the building itself is and was constructed originally in 1924, this new foundation for the tower would be something that's typically 4.5 feet in diameter and roughly 30 feet deep just to hold the tower. And once we get into the ground there, although we're confident that we know what's under there, until those borings are done, we're not really sure. So the height wouldn't change on this tower next to the station. The height would have to change at the tower over at Cook Hill. So there are some threats, if you will, or some unknowns anyway. So we've taken that consultation, which our current vendor has given us to great length, right, and to great detail, and we're confident that which we've kind of driven forward with is exactly what we need. So to hire a consultant, go to bid for a consultant for both qualifications and cost, and then go through that process would cost us a significant amount of money and back this project up.
Councilor Fishbein. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are there any similarly sized towns that have gone out to bid on this?
There are communities that have both gone out to bid and then have realized a purchase through the state contract pricing. Middletown comes to mind, that just went through this process. I can tell you that the town of West Hartford recently completed a project, and Bristol completed a project. So the Bristol project with the state contract pricing was $6.7 million, and after Motorola's discounts of $1.7 million, the RFP bid price was approximately $4.9 million. The city of West Hartford, the Motorola state contract discount price was $7.7 million, the additional discount was $1.9 million, and the RF bid price was $5.7 million. So we're confident that if we were to go to bid, that the pricing points that we're assuming would come in for us without going to bid are probably going to be very close, very, very similar.
Well, I asked because you had expressed a concern about being able to put together a bid document, and I'm just thinking, why couldn't we just copy one that somebody else did? I mean, or use that as a guidepost, if they spent $50,000 on it, and we start from that. And
right, so to answer your question to the best of my ability, it's my understanding that each of these systems is so unique, and although they're very similar, they're very much different at the same time. Our site is a 4-tower site. Our system is a 4-tower site. We're looking to add a 5th tower that's currently constructed on property owned by the Water Division, but actually located in the city of North Branford. When you take all those things into consideration, I think it would be very difficult to write or look at a bid spec for some other community, knowing that the systems are probably vastly different.
Does Motorola have any, I mean, you said a couple of times it's the premier product. Is there a competitor, somebody even close?
There are other manufacturers. Some come in, some come out. Currently, besides Motorola, GE has a small commercial footprint. Harris is another manufacturer. Tate Radio is another manufacturer.
Okay. So, I mean, it's really important. I don't, we're talking about a lot of money here. We're talking about, between $5 and $7 million, and I'm really hesitant on a bid waiver. I usually don't do bid waivers on a $50,000 project, and so I'm weighing a lot in my head. So, okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Chiefs.
Good evening.
It's nice to see all this brass in front of us. Chief, what's the life cycle of this new system?
So for the subscribers, which are typically mobiles and portables from brand new, we expect a typical 20-year life cycle. Our stuff gets a lot of use, and when I say our stuff, public safety, we get a lot of use out of that. It's in inclement weather, it's run over, kicked, stomped, dropped, and it lasts. So 15 years to 20 years on portables and mobiles. The tower sites, we would think, would be a 30 to 50 year investment. Rigid structures, not something that would be subject to deterioration in short time. So this proposal calls for, it's very much IP based, where our current system is very much copper wire. And this system calls for a refreshing, if you will, on the backbone every 2 to 3 years, right? So new servers, new switches, new gear on the tower sites, which will keep it in top condition all the time.
Good. You just answered my second question. So upgrades are included in the price. When I say upgrades, I mean software updates and so forth.
So the software updates would be a separate maintenance contract. Currently, we pay a maintenance contract for our system, and this would require a similar maintenance contract.
Okay. And we don't have a dollar value there?
I don't.
Okay. Mayor, obviously this is a big dollar number. I'm assuming we'd probably bond this out?
That would be our intention, right?
Yeah. And Chief, outside of the 2 antenna that would need to be replaced, is there a need to have any other antenna facility in the town?
No. Without compromising the location of some of our tower infrastructure, it's located on very rigid structures in our town, which would not need to be replaced.
Mayor, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to, with regard to the funding, the council's role obviously doesn't end. If we move forward, there has to be negotiation of a contract. Those terms would have to be known, what departments are in or out, and ultimately what the dollar figure is. Obviously, there has to be a decision made regarding authorizing that funding, which we're all part of. So tonight isn't a one and done. There's a lion's share of work that has to follow tonight's meeting, whatever direction is, we think the best direction really is to allow us to be efficient with choice of the vendor, but a lot of work still has to be done.
And I appreciate the flexibility of the chair to allow discussion around basically 2 items, 9 and 10 here, because we are transitioning somewhat in our line of questioning to those 2 items.
It's merely for efficiency's sake.
I appreciate that very much. Do we know, because this is part of business continuity as well, it would serve dual purposes, do we know if there's any grant money available at the federal or state level that may provide some relief from the overall dollar value?
All the research we've done, all the people we've spoken to, industry professionals, have led us to believe that there is not grant funding available. Now I say that to say this. Very recently, we sat with the Board of Education on this matter to give them information relative to a grant that they're applying for through a Safe Schools initiative, and I think Dr. Menzo, if he's still here, can speak further to it. Whatever that sum of money might be, should they be awarded that grant, would help to offset the cost, but I don't know what that amount of money would be.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're keeping all the options on the table, Chief. Thank you. You know, out of concern for certainly public safety, and as a means to enhance our business continuity plan here in Wallingford, which is just so important. We never know when a disaster is going to strike, and we want to make sure that we're prepared. I think we're doing the right thing here. Certainly, I support the bid waiver to go to Motorola. I think they're an outstanding company in communications, been around a long time. We've been utilizing their products for many years. I don't have a problem with that. I like your game plan for using someone on the team to really come through with a detailed report on what we need. I'm not fond of copying another municipality's plan. I tried that once in high school. I didn't finish my assignment. I copied a friend's. We both failed. So that can be a consequence, right, when you take from someone else. But I just want to say, certainly I'm in favor of this where public safety is concerned. Let's just see if we can get the best price we can. And as the mayor said, sequentially, this council is going to move forward on consideration and approvals as we go down the line. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. My mind was a little blown when I read that the fire department radio is still on VHF. So thank you for addressing that. And you talked about going from 4 towers to 5 towers. I imagine one of the unique elements of the bid specifications are the topographic elements of the town. You know, and that's something that's unique to every piece of land, certainly in a place like Connecticut, as opposed to somewhere in the Midwest where it's all flat. Am I correct? Is that just one of the significant factors?
Right. So in order to fill in some significant dead spots that Chief Heidgard suffers on the VHF side, which, believe it or not, is right at the foot of South Broad Street by Home Depot. They are completely dead there for whatever reason, right? So we worked with Mr. Hendershot very early in this process to see would it be possible to get a tower up near the switching station on Old Colony Road, trying to fill in that dead spot. And along that time, Rich and I had a conversation about could it be possible to move the fire service up to 800. And building penetration on two-way radios is critical to the fire service. And to their credit, they did a lot of footwork going into these dark, thick buildings with an 800 megahertz radio, making sure that they could get out. And they're satisfied that they can. We don't suffer any dead spots in town. There is a little area down in the southeast end of town that this tower in North Branford will fill in. So all the mapping that we've done with a portable radio on a hip with a shoulder mic, which is so important when you measure that, gets them out of these dark areas where right now they can't.
That's got to be critically important, to say the least. Councilor Testa.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just a couple of points I want to make. I want to thank you all for the work you put into this. I know, as you mentioned earlier, it's been researching this for close to 2 years, or at least 2 years. There's no question in my mind that all due diligence has been performed. And when I asked you, say the major justification for wanting to stick with this vendor and thereby seek a bid waiver, you mentioned the fact that all of the equipment you had, the experience you had, and then you told me about the system itself. And I'm very, very happy to hear about the interconnectivity with all of the other departments. Knowing that the greeter in our school can hit the button and call the police, have an instant contact with police or fire, emergency response, that's amazing. Throughout the town, to have that kind of interconnectivity. You've put together a communication system that, really fits and exceeds the needs. I don't want to say exceeds the needs because that's the wrong choice of words. It gets the job done as well as it could be done. I appreciate that. Excuse me. I know that the issue of bid waivers can be sensitive at times. There are, some people that probably say should never have a bid waiver. And I would merely point out that our ordinance allows for a bid waiver. And that precisely for circumstances such as this, when the work has been done and it's been determined that what's best for the town is a certain type of procurement. And that would necessitate a big waiver. You've gone above and beyond in justifying it. Thank you for that. I joked at you a little bit about that quote from John Glenn, who said there was different versions of this, but sitting on top of a rocket made with 2 million parts, all built by the lowest bidder on a government contract. Well, sometimes saying we should go to the lowest bidder isn't necessarily the best way to go. Thankfully, those flights worked, but I'm in favor of this. I think the whole town will be well served for a long time. And again, all that you've done here is above and beyond the call of duty to get this thing worked out for us. So thank you. I'm full support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Testa. Councilor Shortell.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Just to go back to one thing, Chief, you said that, sorry about that. Can we include the town hall in this contract? No. 18 to 24 month delay. The phone? Yeah,
Closer to your face.
Okay. Yeah, right. You said there'd be an 18-month delay if we don't pass the bid waiver. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct, but let me just qualify that. Should we need to go and hire a consultant, that process itself, the qualifications-based and then the cost-based bid system for a consultant, could take a period of time up to a year, more than likely. They would have to then thereafter create a bid spec for us, and then go to bid. So we're looking at anywhere between 15, 18 months up to 2 years, I would think.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Councilor Testa said about all the work you put into it, and it's very thorough and it's appreciated. Thank you.
Councilor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I'm one of those people that tends to push back on bid waivers. I'm usually not supportive of them because I always feel like I want to know what our options are. Could we maybe find out what else is going on? How do we know we're getting a good deal? But much to Councilor Testa's point, you guys have done a lot of homework. There's been a lot of explanation here. I'm satisfied with the idea that this could cause, by going out to bid, could cause delay, could add costs by having to have a consultant, and it may not yield us all that much in savings. So I'm comfortable giving those things to support that. I'm also supportive of the idea when we get there to bond this out, because we speak so highly in this town about our great bond rating, and this is a perfect example of intelligent borrowing when we get there, to utilize that bond rating and to take a large purchase like this and spread it out over time so that we get the best bang for our dollar today and future dollars that come in that become less expensive because there's inflationary pressure there, more income coming in as the grand list changes and taxes go up and so on and so forth. It's $15 a year to support this over a 20-year bond for something that has somewhere between a 30 and 50-year lifespan. $15 a year on the median assessed homeowner in town. I ran those numbers. It's certainly within our ability to be smart about doing something like this and to bond it out. It's, again, everybody has these different discussions around the bid waivers, about these big ticket items and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. We don't borrow and borrow and borrow. We're real smart about what we do here in town. and we need to keep being smart, and this is a perfect candidate for something like that. So based on all of that, I will be supporting this, and I just wanted to extend my thanks to all of you for putting together such a robust report for us to review. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the public? There being none, I bring it back to the council for a motion on number 10.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve a bid waiver for Motorola Solutions in an amount between $5.95 and $7 million to allow negotiations of a contract.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein,
Yes.
Laffin,
Yes.
Letourneau,
Yes.
Shortell,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Testa,
Yes.
Zandri,
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes.
The motion passes.
On to item 11, a motion, please.
I move we approve a bid waiver for VCOM LLC in the amount of $18,375 to secure additional radio channels.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein,
Yes.
Laffin,
Yes.
Letourneau,
Yes.
Shortell,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Testa, Zandri,
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your work on this. On to item 12, which is discussion regarding changing the name of High Street in Yalesville to Hyde Road. Councilor Fishbein, your item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So while Councilor Shortell and I were doing some door-to-door constituent face-to-face stuff, we were on High Street in Yalesville, in which time we met a Judy Giannatino, who happens to be in the audience, who expressed concern about the fact that we have High Street in Yalesville and High Street in the center of town, and that she has trouble ordering items online, particularly because they get delivered to this side of town. And I was able to corroborate that with at least two other residents, one of which happens to be my sister. And Judy had expressed concern about, how do we get this changed? And there were different ways that I looked at possibly meeting her need. One would have been to zip code differently Yalesville, which we don't have the power to do. One would be to change numbers of houses, which I think would be logistically difficult. And the third one would be to change the name of the road. I did go talk to Casey Hand in our Planning and Zoning Department, and she expressed to me that we had the ability to do this. I did, in follow-up with one of the residents, find out that our GPS systems, or at least the one that person used, has already made this change to High Road, and I did confirm that through my own GPS system in my car. And I think we should try and do something to help out these residents. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Mayor.
Yeah, just in terms of the protocol, this has come up before, and as a general rule, we have surveyed people along a street if there's to be a change of name. Obviously, everyone who lives along the street will have to change an address, and some are willing to do that and some are not. So in order to give them notice and a chance to opine what they would support, that's what's been done. I mean, I think the council has the authority to change the name if you want, but you must be aware that obviously that will affect every person and require them to change their address with every organization or entity that they expect mail from. It has been done before. In fact, I think in 2005 or 2006, High Street was the subject of such a survey, and the majority did not want to change. But we can do that again and find out what interest there is.
Counselor Fishbein,
Yeah, Mayor, how do we, how does that happen? Is there a mailing? Is there door-to-door canvassing? There's only about 22 houses, I think, on this street that would be affected.
I believe there was a mailing to each address, and we did receive results back. If we didn't receive anything, if the mail came back, then we'd have to look into why. But I think the survey in 2005 or 6 was actually sent out by the council.
And would it call for affirmation by 100% or?
We didn't put a rule on it, but it was a majority anyway. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there was a majority who were not supportive.
Okay. So in order to advance this, you would be looking for some sort of motion to appropriate funds, perhaps from our budget, for a mailing?
No, I don't think it would require an appropriation of funds. Just if you're interested in doing that, we can follow through and get a letter out. I don't think it would cost additional funds. It should be well within what our either my office or another office would be able to fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
certainly. So Mayor, your office would be willing to undertake the mailing the survey?
That's correct.
Okay. Chief, did you want to be heard?
We can handle that. Our community police division can handle that. We actually probably would take that on and go out into that neighborhood and speak with everybody collectively. Sometimes you get more information, I think, maybe while you're there. And at the same time, we can maybe address some other issues that might be going on that we're unaware of now. So we'd be willing to do that. I'm not sure what the formal process is, but our staff can undertake that should that be the choice.
I'm confident that between you, Chief, and the Mayor, the two of you can work that out.
We don't normally speak about such things, but we'll make an exception.
Councilor Sullivan.
Yeah, just based on experience, I would encourage you, based on the results of the survey, to work with the Postal Service as well, because they're going to have to upgrade their systems on their delivery point sequencing to make sure that the mail goes to the right place. And I know the postmaster would probably want to be a participant in the discussion, not that he'll probably go along with it, but just to help them to make sure that the mail is sorted properly, and most of that's done today electronically. And it's efficiently delivered to the people if we rename the street.
And I think you need to hear from people, but one other thing, a change from High Street to High Road might not get us where we want to go. Because I know of an address on Washington Street that gets mail from George Washington Trail. So High Street to High Road might not be enough of a difference to be a better guarantee of accuracy and delivery. But I think we need to hear from.
Yeah, and if I make one more point, and we'll come out to you, ma'am, in just a moment. But having some postal experience, years ago when we sorted all the mail across the street by hand, a letter carrier would actually read the name and the address and would know whether it was High Street in Yalesville or High Street here off of North Main, right? Well, since they transitioned to fully automated, for the most part, delivery point sequencing, letter carriers don't know until they get out there, because the mail's already set up for them and they deliver it, that it may belong to High Street in Yalesville versus High Street in Wallingford. So I think at some point, based on the survey, you may want to just strike up a conversation with the postmaster. Thank you.
Before I go out to the public per Councilor Sullivan's request, is there anything else from the council? Ma'am, please come forward and give us your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Judy Genatino at 40 High Street in Yalesville. And as far as the mail, my mail, even if it says Yalesville, but most of the time it says Wallingford, because we have the same zip code.
Right.
And it always goes across. In fact, my electric bill from Wallingford went to Wallingford. And I don't get my mail right away. I can't order my prescriptions by mail because it might go to Wallingford and I may not get it. I've actually had oil delivered to my house that was supposed to go to the other Wallingford address. I was supposed to go for chemo treatment, and it snowed, and the plow guy went over to Wallingford. I didn't get my plow dry. I couldn't go for my chemo treatment. And you may not appreciate all the problems that there is. It's not just the mail, it's anything. I had a man coming trying to deliver a refrigerator, and it wasn't for me, and he was arguing with me. And you just don't understand. I mean, I put my address in, it says invalid address. I can't do anything. I can't order anything online because I don't get it. Because I have an invalid address. I've lived here for over 15 years, and that 2005 was also me, because I just can't do anything. I've gotten to the point where I just want to move, because I can't do anything. Nobody cares, and nobody does anything about it except Mr. Fishbein.
Ma'am, I hope you didn't take my comments as opposed to this.
No, I didn't,
Okay.
but I just want you to understand what you're talking about.
I do know, because...
I actually have a very good post woman
Yeah.
who, I know when she's not in town or on, because she will always do it unless it's, but I've had my things from the IRS always going to Wallingford. Now it has to go from Wallingford back to the post office and to me. And sometimes I get a penalty because it's not delivered to me.
Yeah, and you're right.
I just don't appreciate the difference, the problems that it is with the two streets. And I understand, because last time I know they made fun of me because I came here. And I'm really upset. And when I tell people there's two high streets, and I try to explain to have them I said, could you just put in handwrite Yalesville? Well, everything's computerized. You can't do that. And then they're like, what kind of town do you live in? And I said, well, it's a crazy town, because I can't get anybody to help us. And I really feel like nobody cares, except Mr. Fishbein was the first person, Mr. Schrittel, were the first people who listened to me. So I appreciate your thing with your survey, which most of those people have lived there for a lot of times, and a lot of those people don't have the same address, the same number on the other side.
Can I ask you, what is your address, the number?
40.
40, so there's a 40 on the Wallingford?
Yes.
Okay.
But not-
Are you willing to change your number?
Yes, I'll do anything.
Okay, so we could accomplish that, I believe, with the building department. You would have to be willing to change your address to a different number on High Street. But assuming we can do a survey, find out if others, but if most people are not willing to change, we could have your number changed, but you would have to change your address, obviously.
And it won't affect my deed, right? It won't affect my deed?
Won't affect what?
My
Do a
deed
for-
or my deed, my mortgage.
Or your deed? No,
It's just the mailing it.
you would have to notify the lending institution that has your mortgage. Obviously, that would be part of all the notification.
Right.
But it wouldn't affect your ownership of your property, no. So we can, with the police department, we can check on whether there's interest in changing the name. But if it's a number issue, that's even easier. The building department can just change your number. And then you would have to follow through and say, lending institution wherever, I'm now number X. And if it's not any number that's on High Street in Wallingford, you should be getting your
Don't have
mail.
all the same numbers on both sides of the street. So that's why when you took the survey, not everybody, the people who weren't affected, of course, they say, no, I don't want to change the name. Because they weren't affected. They don't have to go through what we go
Right,
through.
well, if you're satisfied, we can look to change your number and not do a survey.
Well, I'd be happy with anything. As
Well,
long as I can
was anyone else upset about the?
My understanding is from Councilor Fishbein that there was at least one other resident. There was two.
Okay, well, we have someone else who's also concerned. So we can look for both. If we choose a completely different number, that should eliminate it. But we'll do a survey
There's
and
also
go from
another
there.
person who actually, when she moved in, she went on Channel 8.
Okay, so someone else is, okay. So
Because you don't have
we'll
the
proceed
same
with the survey, and then if that does not show a majority wanting, we can contact you with regard to the number.
I would appreciate it.
Okay.
I would vote for your next.
No,
Thank you.
got nothing to do with it. Okay.
Anyone else from the public care to speak? Councilor Zandri?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add to to your entire point, that sometimes it's, the number isn't even enough. It's even the similar names. I live on Lincoln Drive Extension 35. Lincoln Avenue is right around the corner for me. There is no 35 on Lincoln Avenue, but I still have problems with my deliveries, mainly Amazon. For the longest period of time, I had to argue with them because, and I think this is probably a similar problem to what you've had with the invalid address. You try to enter it into their system and they're saying it's not a valid address. So even a number change may not necessarily help in all cases. That's why I'm almost considering the difference between, I'll support any action that the neighbors want to do, but High Street and High Road may not be enough because I'm on Lincoln Drive, we've got a Lincoln Avenue, and don't even have a corresponding number, and there's still some difficulty. So I think we need to approach this a little bit larger because it does occur, and sometimes it's the routing and sorting of the mail and whichever, whether it's UPS or the Postal Service or whomever, and sometimes it just comes down to I can't find 35 on Lincoln Avenue and they just drop the package. So, well, yeah, the zip codes are an issue, definitely. But I certainly believe that when you've got too many names that are too close in style and or exacting, with the exception of the ending Street, Road, Avenue, you're going to end up with this problem. So I mean, I've experienced it personally to a very minor degree than what the resident had. So I definitely think that if we're looking at this, we may need to entirely change the name. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Councilor Testa?
With the button. Thank you. That's the point I was just going to make is why don't, how many homes are on the street? About 20?
22, I heard.
All right. I was just going to make a suggestion that, I don't want to come up with one, but an example, let's change the name to something totally different. Call it Yalesville Road, call it New Street, call it whatever you wish. Why don't the neighbors decide a name they like and come back to us with a name you'd like? Because it appears to me that there'll be support here to change the name. So come up with a name that works for everyone on the street and suggest it just like a builder would, and we'll change the name to whatever you would like. Is there a problem with that?
Well, I think the police will find out if there's support for any change. They'll canvass, go door to door, find out who is concerned. In the past, there have not been enough concerned to support a change in the name because they don't want to change their addresses. So if we find that same situation, and I think if we find a majority say, yes, change the name, then right, we need to choose a name that is not close to high.
Right.
Right, but assuming that not enough are interested in a change, then we'll deal with those who are having a problem and we can change the number. The building department can do that. And those individuals, those certain addresses would have to change their address with all of their, all the vendors, the institutions, the people that they deal with or expect mail from, but the rest of the street wouldn't be impacted. And with a different number, they should be without a problem anymore. It seems to be that there's two 40s. One is 40 High Street Wallingford and 40 High Street Yalesville.
I know, I looked it up.
So that's the easiest thing unless everyone is willing to have a new name. But then, name for the street. But then obviously with your license, with everything, you have to change all contacts, otherwise the mail will not reach you.
Well, I mean, everyone has had to move at one point or another in their life, but I understand if the majority of the people on the street don't want to change, well, that's a different story, I suppose. All right.
Ms. McKean?
Eileen McKean, Burke Heights. There's no other Burke Heights in town. I have strong connections up in Maine. I have a house up in Maine, in Norway, Maine. About 20 years ago, the entire state had roundtabled emergency services, the post office, and local government to clear up any of these sorts of very similar names because emergency services were going to the wrong addresses. So some streets were named differently. I had a friend who lived on Barbary Road or something, and they changed it completely, something completely different, historical to the area. My house number changed. I went from 15 Crescent to 22 Crescent. And they handled all the changes. They notified everybody, so all the bills just suddenly came up with 22 Crescent. Wasn't a big deal. But it was a round table of services that did it. And the only input really that residents has was if they had a preferred name to change, if their street was slated to be a name change, then they could like put in for it, and however it was decided, it was decided. But with a problem like that, you call an ambulance and street name to street name or number, and they show up in the wrong street and then they can't find the number, that's a disaster. But if you get everybody around to do it at once, it may solve all those problems once and for all.
I think we're all in agreement that we hope for a solution that works for, certainly for you, ma'am, and certainly for the rest of your street. So we will hopefully hear back from the administration soon about the survey results, and we'll address this again. If there's nothing else, we will move on to item 13. Or this item, discussion and possible action regarding a transfer for publication of explanatory notice on the Charter Revision ballot question. I think we have people here from the Charter Revision Commission. There's been some interest expressed in having the explanatory language that would accompany the ballot on Election Day published in advance. If you'd like to come forward or not. Is anyone interested in making a motion? The reason why this is on the agenda is because in a conversation I had with Attorney Small, she indicated that publication of the explanatory text in advance of the ballot or in advance of Election Day had to be approved by the council.
I'll make a motion that we approve funds for the publication of the explanatory text of the question on the ballot for charter revision.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Good evening. Since you're sitting there, please remind us who you are for the record.
Christina Tata, I was the Vice Chair of the Charter Revision Commission.
Jonathan Chappell, I was also on the commission.
Okay. You have anything to add to what we're talking about?
I mean, I don't see why it really should be an issue, but that's my opinion. I know on July 11th when the council discussed the actual explanation that was presented by the law department, there was no discussion or debate on the actual wording, and it did pass by an 8-to-1 vote. So the actual explanation that the law department provided seems acceptable to all of you at that point, except for possibly one of you. And really our point, our whole purpose at this point is to inform the voters. So the work is done. You know, any sort of discussion on topics that are in the revisions or didn't make it into the revisions, that's water under the bridge at this point. So we're here now with a question that's going to be on the ballot for all of the voters in 2 weeks. And really, I think we would all just want to make sure that the voters are informed, that everybody knows what they're voting on. We don't want people to skip answering the question because they simply don't understand what they're voting on, or you know, they're just not informed. So we certainly just want to get information out, and it's my opinion that you know, on top of all the other ways that people can look into this, the red line version is posted on the town website. So I thank the council for their help with getting that on there. That is on there now. All of our minutes are posted on the town website, so I would encourage everybody to look at that. But with the money that we've spent on putting the entire red line version in the record journal, the money we've spent so far with the entire commission on public notices, on paying a secretary, I think this, for another small amount of money, to put this one-page explanation into the record journal would be very helpful to the voters and would really reach the largest amount of voters that can be reached.
I'm sitting up here, so I feel like I have to say something, but I'm going to say I echo all
The consensus amongst a lot of people up here. Yeah.
And this is a one-page summary that gives someone at least an outline that they can then search for details, which are online. And I know that members of the or former members of the commission would be more than happy to answer any specific questions like we did before the meeting here tonight.
You know, I think it gives people the opportunity to not have to stand at the poll and read this entire thing before they vote. But that's just one man's opinion. Councilor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the representation that there was no discussion about the text is just factually inaccurate. I specifically asked for one specific change, and I claimed that there was one particular sentence that was, I thought, to the neutral person, a little oppressive, that specifically being the one that says it also includes removing language/provisions which are no longer required, deemed necessary or appropriate, and I had suggested that be removed. I know there was another modification that I had suggested, but it was further on, I think it was paragraph 4. But I have no objection to educating the public as to what they're voting on. Perhaps my objection at all is, you know, why aren't we just publishing the revisions, which I think we already did once. And I don't know what it costs to do that. I know it's not cheap. So like, I don't know, $1,200 or something like that. Maybe somebody knows. I would have no objection to doing that. But yes, I defer to the town clerk if I may.
Oh, you may. Are you talking about the insert that we did?
Yes.
$6,500.
Okay, that's expensive.
We don't have time to do that again.
Okay. So I would have no objection to that, but this is like somebody else's watered down, with all due respect, interpretation of all of those changes. So I don't know that that gets us where we necessarily want to be, and it's going to be tiny, isn't it? I mean, it's in the municipal section where they put like on the front page of the what?
Well, since I'm going to be putting it in the paper, you can defer to me.
I'll defer again.
All right. We can put it in 2 places.
What size?
I won't be fresh. I'm sorry.
What size is it going to be?
We can, well, I sent it to the Record Journal for a price quote. I asked for a legal ad, which I think was $375, or I forget my backup.
It's
It was $375 or $390. The highest price was $390. I said, could we put it on the Wallingford page or the legal ad? And the highest price was $390. And I sent it to them in a PDF as a, you know, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So I'm not sure, you know, you could put it either place.
So do we know, because I see the quote, nowhere on here do they say that we're going to publish it as 8 by 11?
No, they didn't. They actually don't say that. I would agree.
I know that the prices for that municipal ad page run somewhat high, so for $390, I gotta think it's probably like 6 inches at the most, probably 3 by 6, which is tiny.
They say an ad in the body of the paper is $390 and legal
Councilor
classified
Turner
ad is
saying it's smaller.
$379.
So, you know, I'm all for information, education, all that stuff, but those are my problems with what's before us. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Testa.
Thank you. I would suggest that this be run as is, and if it costs more to make it the right size so that it's easily read, so be it. And also, I would want at the bottom or at the top or somewhere a reference to the link so people can read the whole red line version online. Certainly that would make sense. Here's the link so you can read everything. Here's the law department's, that should be specified. Here's the law department's summary. And please go to the following link to read the whole thing. And if it costs $500 or $750 to make sure it's of a size that is, workable, then by all means, that's a worthwhile expense. With everything else we spend money on, this is vital. Let people know what we're asking them to vote on. So those are my feelings.
Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask the town clerk something here. This was for the Record Journal proper. How about the Post, the pickup ad in the Post?
Yeah, I mean, they don't offer that, they didn't offer me that.
Okay, so that's something, because the Record Journal, anybody that subscribes to the Record Journal will see this, but the ones that don't subscribe to it, they get the free paper, which is the Post. So to get 100% household coverage in Wallingford, you really need to go to the Post. So
Yeah.
the pickup ad generally is less money. It's a fraction of the column inch. And I
But
think
you've got to
right now-
get it in, what, by Thursday?
Thursday.
Hmm.
That's when the.
Well, we could send it to them tomorrow.
Yeah.
If this is approved.
I think it's this, if we approve $390, you're not going to have enough. So I would like to see maybe give you a little latitude, a do not exceed amount. Maybe to be on the safe side, do not exceed $800, something like that. This $390 is not going to buy a big enough ad in the Record Journal either. Because per column inch, you're looking at 39, I think it's, the open rate, I believe, is $39 or close to that per column inch. So, a 2x2 ad, what? If it's a political rate, it'll even be
I don't
higher.
think we're going to pay, I don't think a municipality is going to pay a political ad rate. We're going to pay a different type
No,
of a
but
rate.
you might pay the top, even if it's a top advertising rate, if you put it on the Wallingford page instead of back in the back of the paper, if you can get it someplace on a Wallingford page or someplace in a little bigger ad, I mean, this really should be, say, a 4-column inch by 4-column inch ad.
So the next item is to appropriate the funds, and we can put our own amendment in the dollar amount when we appropriate the funds.
I'm looking at it here, but okay.
Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you all set, Councilor Letourneau?
I guess I am. Thank you.
Okay.
For cutting.
You sure you don't have anything else?
Oh, I'll have more. Go ahead.
Okay. Councilor Sullivan.
I'm sorry, Barbara, but I know what you're going to do. I know your plan is, and I'm just, because this is spiraling out of control fast. I know what you're going to do. You're going to
What am I
call
gonna
tomorrow.
do?
You're going to get a price. You're going to call tomorrow. You're going to see what it costs to put it in the Post.
Of course I am.
And that's it, yeah. So
And it's going to get done.
I don't see why we're going to continue to debate that. I trust you.
But I need the money.
Well, you're going to get the money. We can't over-communicate this enough. And let's not let anyone ever say that we weren't transparent in this process. And we didn't go to the nth degree to make sure everyone who took a reasonable approach to find out about this question and, the why behind it has that opportunity. So I think we're doing the right thing here. I think we should make sure that it's big enough where everyone can see it and everyone has the opportunity to see it. So I'm glad you're here in front of us. Again, we cannot over-communicate this enough. Whether it passes, whether it fails, I don't ever want to hear anybody say, well, I didn't know what the question means. It's on Facebook, there's a website, and it'll be in the paper. I don't know how else we can cover it. So thank you for your efforts. That's all I have to say.
Councilor Laffin.
Yeah, no, what everybody else said. Move on to the next.
All right. Councilor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to echo everybody else's sentiment up here, and I like Councilor Letourneau's add-on point, because it's spot on, because you want to get this out to everybody, and he's right. If you don't get the Record Journal, you'll get the Post in the mail. So, you know, if it costs us a little bit more, then let's do it. I mean, I've run on the mantra of get informed, get involved, and vote. And that's just for me running for council. But it's also for anything that we've got to vote on. And if the people can't get informed, they can't get involved, and they can't make an intelligent decision to vote. So I'm all for it. I completely support it. And I want to thank you for your time to try to push this one more time so that people can't say I didn't know. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Shortell.
Can we just go back to the PUC for a minute? I really think 5 members would, just thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the public? Ms. Cole, welcome.
Tricia Cole, 50 North Street. I was also a member of the Charter Revision Commission, and I really am in favor of getting this out in the best possible form, because I have talked to people and they're like, what's Charter Revision? What's being revised? And I don't want people to miss the question. We worked very hard on this, and we want people to vote on what we did, and I don't want them to miss the fact that there is a question on the ballot. So, thank you very much.
Did we get your full name and address for the record?
I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? I bring it back to the council. Councilor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilor Testa made a great suggestion, and I just didn't know if you wanted a motion to the effect of adding the URL for the actual charter language that's on the town website, or is that understood?
We can amend the motion on the table to add the URL.
Okay, so moved.
My motion was simply to authorize the publication and put it together any way you want, sure. Is that on tape? You're on tape saying I had a good idea, right?
Yeah, because it came from you and not Sullivan.
It's a great idea, I think you say, if I'm not mistaken.
So I think there was a motion to amend your motion to add the URL to the publication. Is there a second to the amendment?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Can we have a roll call vote on the amendment, please?
Microphone. Yes. Fishbein?
Yes.
Lappin?
Yes.
Letourneau?
Yes.
Shortell?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Testa?
Yes, and I agree with Councilor Fishbein's
This is on the
comment
tape
about-
now. This
right.
is official.
Yes, I
Okay.
agree with Councilor Fishbein.
Oh my goodness. Zandri.
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes, so the amendment passes.
The amendment passes.
Now on the amended motion.
Fishbein?
Yes.
Lappin?
I have a question, if I could.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
I withdraw my yes then.
Sorry, thank you. Should we be specifying that this is paid for by the town of Wallingford and not one of the organizations out there that may be?
This is not
not
a
a
solicitation.
Correct. So
Public notice, right?
That should be, that will be
yeah.
clear on the notice, that's what I want.
It would not be a solicitation.
Maybe we should put this in the legal notice ad section of the paper then. But
That's-
my opinion is no one reads that part of the paper.
I agree, but so if it's not in that section, I just think it should be noted where the funding came from to pay for it.
We're not a political entity. I don't think that's right. To put paid for by the Wallingford
So your point is
municipality.
there's no obligation to identify the funding
Of course
source
not.
because it's not a political funding source.
There's not, but I don't
course
want to
not.
confuse people.
That would be
We're
ridiculous.
not advocating
Right.
one way or the other.
Correct.
Well, why can't the text, even at the bottom, just say public notice, even though it's in another part of the paper?
I could absolutely do that.
That's all.
That's all, I mean,
I
just
think that might be more clear to the,
agree.
why don't we put at the top of it, notice to Wallingford voters?
Yeah,
Do you like that?
Yes.
Do we like that?
I think
Yes.
we'll leave that in your hands.
Oh my God,
Thank you. If you could recall the vote on the amended motion.
Recall,
Call it again.
Call it again,
call it
please.
again. Fishbein,
Yes.
Laughlin.
Yes.
Letourneau.
Yes.
All right. Shortell.
Yes.
Sullivan.
You know, it was easier to approve $5.7 million
No.
for the police department.
40 minutes.
Yes.
Stress.
Testa.
Yes?
Yes. Zandri.
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes.
I missed you guys.
Clearly.
Motion passes.
And then item 14 is to appropriate the funds.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve a transfer in the amount of up to $1,000 for contingency, to contingency account to the town council for publication of explanatory notice on the charter revision ballot question.
Mayor.
Yeah, you can't increase it beyond what's there because that's the sign off.
That's gonna be a problem then.
We'll figure out a way to handle it. So why don't we move it as written, and if we need to get more money, we'll figure out how to approve it.
Then I will amend my motion to say 390 instead of 1,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes.
That
Just a
isn't-
quick question. Would it be appropriate to authorize, to have a motion to authorize the mayor to exceed that amount if necessary? Just because he has emergency spending authorizations? Would that make any difference?
I don't think any office has the ability to spend where money is not in an account. I know that. I mean, there's no emergency spending. If money is not in an account, no one has the authority, short of the council, to authorize an expenditure by putting money in the account.
Yeah.
But I'll have to talk with personnel and see, we'll find out what the total is, and then if it requires, a special meeting, that's one thing. If we can help fund it from other accounts that are already authorized for something like this, then that's another way to look at this. But deal with the 390, and we'll see if we can deal with it beyond that. But there's no authority to spend money that isn't
They're
properly.
going to bill us, though. They're going to bill us, so we'll have another meeting within 30 days.
Okay.
I just meant to let you know that you can put the ad in if it runs up to 1,000. It's just like a...
Thank you. Councilor Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it understood that our good town clerk is going to attempt to get the ad at 8.5 by 11 plus the post? Is that the direction? That if we can get them to do that for $1,000, that we're good?
Never
I
happened.
think that's a direction. Do you want that direction?
If they'll
What do
do
you
it.
want?
It'll never
It's a
happen.
full page.
It's too much money?
Page.
It's too much money.
It's a quarter page,
Third of a page.
black and white, and they get the post.
Yeah.
If we can do it, we can do it.
When we discussed this last week, we discussed a quarter page.
I sent it to her and said, could I have this as is? And this is the prices she gave me. It was an email back from a woman I'd never heard from the Record Journal before. But I ran with it.
Okay, and then we just started the fiscal year, basically. We're, 4 months in? I mean, don't we have enough money in our office expense budget to pay for this?
You don't have any money in your office expense. I have money in my office expense.
There you go. But we,
I think
okay.
he's just as happy to spend your money.
Yeah. I thought we had an office, I know I questioned the telephone and all that stuff. We have, anyway, okay. Thank you.
Councilor Turno.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, why can't we just waive Rule 5 and take action on it tonight?
No, he has to sign off on it first.
It's the budget transfer.
Transfers require a sign off by the finance department.
I'm confident that this will be funded and paid for.
Oh, I'm sure it is, but,
We actually get the roads plowed, don't we? We managed to get the roads plowed.
Right.
So,
Councilor Zandri.
Yeah, I think my question was partially answered. I just want to make sure I'm clear on it. This is the council office supply transfer, is that where this is going to?
Yeah, we were in council, the council office supply account is zero.
That's why I was asking, is I would have, if it was coming out of the town clerk.
I have a ton of money in my office supply account.
So that's really where our hang-up is. Our hang-up right this moment is that this transfer went into an account that didn't have any money in it, and that's why we're locked at the 390 right now.
Well,
No.
I believe that the account of the town clerk can be used for this, given that.
I can use my own account and then come back to you for money. If you want to do it that way.
That's fine. That was basically what I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you.
But I could use some direction. What do you want? How big of an ad? Where do you want it? And do you want it in the pickup paper?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, a quarter page.
Quarter page, pickup paper.
Yes.
Section.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
I would ask that you pass this for the 390, so that we have that, and I believe the rest of it can be found
I
through a
agree.
suitable account.
Yes.
Any questions or comments from the public? There being none, I'm sorry.
I tried to catch
Ms.
you
Tada.
before, I'm sorry.
I was looking past you.
No, I just wanted to clear up with Counselor Fishbein, I'm sorry. I just didn't want there to be any miscommunication on my end. I got the information of the no discussion from the July 11th minutes. There was a motion to accept the explanatory text as presented, and it noted no discussion. So that's where that came from. I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. On to item 15.
Nothing.
On to item 16.
I move we go into executive session pursuant to section 1-225F and section 1-206B of the Connecticut General Statutes regarding strategy and negotiations with respect to the pending tax appeal matter of Infinity Route 5 Limited Partnership versus Town of Wallingford.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I declare the council in executive session. Kindly clear the chambers. Thank you. I call the meeting back to order. Is there a motion to come out of executive session?
Mr. Chairman, I move we come out of executive session.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I declare the council back in public session. Is there a motion regarding item 17?
I move we authorize settlement in the pending tax appeal matter of Infinity Route 5 Limited Partnership versus Town of Wallingford as discussed in executive session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There being none, the motion passes. There being no further business on the agenda, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed can stay. Good night.